Hello, my name is Bobby Mook, and I'm one of the 6.4 billion people on Earth right now.
There are, as I'm sure you, the UN, realize, many problems in the world today. There's hunger, where every year 15 million children die of hunger, and every 3.6 seconds someone dies of hunger. There's poverty, where at least 80% of humanity lives on less than $10 a day, and 3 billion people in the world today struggle to survive on 2 or less US dollars per day. There's drought, poor water quality, pollution, which includes air pollution, water pollution, and many different other types of pollution. There's epidemics and poor medical resources and poor dispersal of those resources, especially to the third world, where there's been curable diseases that have killed millions of people due to the lack of these medicines. There's unemployment and poor education, which contributes to unemployment. This poor education can be attributed to overcrowding schools and poor dispersal of the resources for education. There's crime and overcrowding of prisons. There's wars of intolerance and wars for resources, which has led to terrorism, and as a response to this terrorism, there's been terrorism and torture. For example, after the 9/11 attacks on the U.S. started the rendition program, and Guantanamo Bay and institutions like Abu Ghraib, where civilians and suspected terrorists were tortured to get information. So, in my view, all of these problems are interrelated and can be traced back to two things. The first is lack of money and resources, but for this problem, there's not much that you, the UN, can do. There, of course, is the temporary band-aid fix for these problems of giving money to help certain ones, but the problems are exceedingly difficult to eradicate, as I'm sure all of you know. So, giving that money helps people only temporarily. It is like the proverb, give a man a fish, he eats for a day. Teach a man a fish, he eats for a lifetime. The problem is, the UN has to do much more than teach people to fish, and how would it be possible to deal with that many people? This brings me to the focus of my video, the global population exacerbating the problems of the world. Every problem in the world stems from the existence of humans, so the more humans there are, the worse the problems get. When we talk about world population growth statistics, we get into very large numbers with many zeros at the end that are hard to relate to and put in perspective. The numbers do nothing to help us understand a factual sentence like the Earth's population is projected to rise from 6,400,000,000 in 2004 to 8,900,000,000 in 2050. That means we will likely increase the world population by 2.5 billion people in the next half century. However, that is still hard to relate to, so if we convert the total population growth of 2.5 billion for the first half of the 21st century to an annual rate of growth, we can expect 54 million additional people per year to occupy the planet. That large number still seems pretty hard to relate to, though, so if we take it down to a per day figure, which would be 149,000 net additional people per day, it's much more understandable because we can compare it with figures we're familiar to. For instance, that would be 2 or 3 football stadiums worth of people. Maybe that doesn't seem like so many people at first, but remember how shocked we were when we were told about the death toll from the December 2004 Asian tsunami? Several 100,000 people died. Yet today, we're adding that many new people to the planet's population every 2 days. Of course, I'm not saying that the number of deaths from a natural disaster or, say, the 1 million people who die each year from malaria don't matter because we've got so many new humans. One of our top goals as a society should be to reduce and eliminate suffering wherever and whenever possible. This leaves us with the seemingly conflicting goals of keeping humanity's numbers at a reasonable or sustainable level, but also not wanting people to suffer and die. Before we discuss how we can support reducing world population growth and still be humanitarians, let's recount why population growth is a problem in the first place. The Earth is a closed system, meaning that we have to recycle or store all the waste we produce. We only have one planet's worth of land and water to provide resources for agriculture, energy, and other needs. How well we do at these two factors, resource use and pollution management, basically depends on two factors. One, the number of people on the planet, and 2, the average amount of resources available per person and the average amount of pollution produced. The world's current population is already estimated to be unsustainable at today's rates of consumption and pollution, and another 2.5 billion people over the next half century and countries striving to raise their standards of living will only exacerbate the problem. Since none of us are clamoring for a decreased standard of living, we must assume that the other side of the equation, the population, is where we can most realistically expect to act to keep our closed system, Earth, in balance. Now that we recognize the fact that overpopulation is a problem and that increasing standards of living around the world will add to our resource use and pollution management challenges, it's tempting to start thinking that disease, poverty, and premature death are unfortunate but necessary. We must resist any such temptation to think that and work towards better solutions. The UN should continue to strive to reduce suffering by combating disease and poverty around the world. The UN should also continue to improve resource efficiency and pollution control so that standards of living can rise without negative impact. And the UN should also keep the global population of humans to numbers that are sustainable. On the population front, that means that the UN needs to make sure that people around the world have access to family planning services and contraceptives. The UN needs to empower women in developing countries economically, socially, and legally in a manner that results in them having an equal say with their husbands in reproductive decisions. The UN needs to modify school curricula around the world to include information on population levels and implications for the future. And finally, the UN needs to reform tax laws in a way that encourages couples to have no more than 2 children. The couples would still be able to have as many kids as they want, but the tax code would no longer subsidize more than 2.
People are a good thing, but population growth without limit is not. If the global population continues to grow at the current rapid pace, all of the problems that you, the United Nations, are dealing with will only become bigger and harder to solve. The UN must reinvigorate their international efforts to slow global population growth. The future of the world depends on it.